Hey, come here. Corporate needs you to find the difference between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture. And that's kinda illegal. So let's talk about this. Sponsored by Linode. Hey everyone, how are you all doing? If you're new here, welcome. My name is Crazy Ken, and today we are very blessed to have an E1 computer in the layer. These things are pretty hard to find because the company only made one generation of them. Because it got struck with the ban hammer. That's right, Apple sued eMachines over the E1's design. But why exactly? What even is an E1 computer? And what happened during the lawsuit? Those are all excellent questions. So let's take a look at the company behind the E1, eMachines. eMachines was founded in September 1998 by Lapshun Wei. The company was backed by two other companies from South Korea, Trigem and Korea Data Systems. eMachines' goal was to make low-cost PCs, around $500, targeting consumers who don't own a computer yet. And it worked. eMachines garnered almost 10% PC market share by March 1999. The company was rising to success, but things take a turn on August 5th, 1999 when they released the E1. And this is where we get into a little bit of legal trouble. As you may have noticed, E1 looks very similar to a fruit-flavored computer that's already on the market, the iMac. I won't go into an elaborate history about what the iMac is, because I already did that in another episode, so take a look. But for now, here's the quick rundown. In the mid-90s, Apple was nearing insolvency, losing money left and right. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple as interim CEO in 1997, he helped create a new product strategy to save the company. The first product introduced with the new strategy was the iMac, featuring an all-new egg-shaped design and frosted blue-green color. Remember, in the 80s and the 90s, you could have a computer in any color you want, as long as it was beige. So this colorful new computer really stood out. The unique design, plus its ease of use and internet readiness, helped it sell 800,000 units from May 1998 to year-end. And if a company sees another company's product succeeding, what are they going to do? They're going to try to replicate that success, right? Look at what happened when TikTok exploded. Pretty much every major social network introduced some sort of short-form video feature. Now, before I nitpick and show you the traits E1 borrowed from iMac, let's take a look at what this computer actually is. The E1 is an all-in-one personal computer, meaning the computer and monitor are combined into one device. It features a 15-inch CRT display at 1024 by 768 resolution and an ATI 3D Rage XL AGP graphics controller. And all of the monitor settings can be adjusted via software. And I know I'm a grown man, but watching a CRT degauss itself is still infinitely amusing. E1 has 64 megabytes of built-in system memory, but this system is upgraded to 192. On the CPU side, E1 uses an Intel Celeron clocked at 433 MHz. However, Windows 98 reads it as a Pentium 2, probably because both chips were similar at the time, and this early version of Windows 98 couldn't tell the difference. The BIOS setup, however, does show the correct CPU name. For internal storage, there's a 6.4 gigabyte hard disk, and on the front is a floppy drive, a 24x CD-ROM drive, questionable stereo speakers, and some other controls we'll talk about later, plus a USB port, headphone jack, and microphone jack. On the side is an Ethernet port, PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard, a serial port, another USB port, audio out, RJ11 phone and wall connectors with a built-in 56K modem, and two PCM CIA slots, which we will test. On the back, there's a parallel port, namely for printers, and a 15-pin MIDI/game controller port, and an interesting thing about the Ethernet port, it shows a red light when disconnected, as opposed to no light. On the software side, E1 ships with Windows 98 First Edition and Microsoft Works, and the whole thing can be yours for $799 US before rebates. So we have these two similar looking products. Now let's take a look at what the E1 borrowed from the iMac. In my opinion, the most glaring copycat move is the color. If we examine it closely, we can see the iMac's Bondi blue color is technically more green than the E1's deep blue color. But from a distance, especially at a quick glance, the color is nearly identical. The frosted texture and translucent appearance are also extremely similar to iMac. The E1 shape also resembles the iMac, though it is a little bit different, but both designs are curvy and teardrop shaped. Even the E1's power button and eject button are nearly identical to the iMac. eMachines even put a handle on top, just like Apple. However, it looks different enough, so I don't think that's too bad of a copy. The keyboard, though, looks really similar to the iMac, even down to the semi-transparent black keycaps. They even mimicked Apple's signature pinstripes on the bottom, probably not a good idea if you want to avoid a lawsuit in my opinion. And while iMac's keyboard is white on top and blue on bottom, E1's keyboard is blue on top and white on bottom. No one will ever know. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my hands on the original E1 mouse. They seem to be rather elusive. The mouse's design was very different from Apple's controversial Puck mouse, so maybe it's a good thing they didn't copy that. Plus, it has a scroll wheel, so that's another nice feature the Apple mouse doesn't have. So, what are we gonna do? Well, Clint recommended this Kensington USB mouse in a box, which has a similar color scheme to the iMac, and I think it pairs well with this, and I was lucky enough to find one still in the shrink wrap. So, there's lots of copy-pasting going on. Heck, even small details like the feet on the bottom of the computer are nearly identical to the iMac. E1 also has a folding stand on the bottom. Oh, and remember how the iMac has a door to cover the I/O? Well, guess what? The E1 has a door as well. But hey, it's not the same. It slides instead of swinging. Completely different. Okay, so I've been giving the E1 a fair share of criticism, so let's shake up the mood a little bit. Credit to where it's due, the E1 has some features the iMac doesn't. For example, it has a floppy disk drive, unlike the iMac. Yes, Apple was trying to move away from older technologies, but there were still plenty of people in the late 90s who liked the convenience of floppy disks. Now, an interesting thing is, when Apple was working on the iMac, they may have been developing a version internally that had a floppy disk drive built in. In fact, I have a rare prototype iMac G3, and it has a floppy disk drive connector on the motherboard with a cable plugged into it. So it shows you they were testing something at one time internally. What it was exactly, I can't say for sure. E1 also has dual PCM CIA expansion slots. Unlike iMac, and thanks to Brainiac Brent's spare parts and his know-how, this E1 can now connect to Wi-Fi. The system also has media controls on the front, play, pause, volume, etc., and a little status LCD. And here's a neat feature. The CD player can actually play music even if the computer is shut down. And another thing I didn't expect, this thing has built-in RCA capture. Yes, feel free to bust out an old game console and hook it up to your E1. You can use it as a display, and you can even record video and capture sound. Pretty neat. E1 also features double the iMac's RAM, 64 megabytes instead of 32, and the hard disk capacity is 6.4 compared to 4. And the CPU is clocked at 433 MHz compared to 233, but keep in mind, one is a Celeron and one is a PowerPC. They're kind of not a fair comparison. And overall, these specs sound better on paper, but how that translates into real life can vary. But the biggest difference was the price. E1 sold for $799, and a mere $399 if you sign up for 3 years of CompuServe. The iMac, on the other hand, sold for $1299. And yes, a lower price can be appealing, especially to first-time computer buyers. And this was eMachine's mission, keep the computers low cost. But you're gonna get what you pay for. The overall build quality feels cheaper than Apple's. It's kind of hard to describe, but it doesn't feel as solid. And the handle on top has a sharp edge, so it's not comfortable to hold. And I'm afraid if I lift the computer with the handle, something is gonna break. It doesn't look or feel that sturdy, and Clint can attest to this. Also, this system feels really slow at times. I've been waiting 2 minutes for it to boot up, and I'm still on the Windows 98 screen. Still loading. Still loading! Martha! That took 3 minutes and 50 seconds to boot up, whereas the iMac, which is even older than the E1, took only 1 minute and 43 seconds. I know that's not a super scientific comparison, but consumers aren't going to be doing super scientific comparisons for speed between products anyway. I'm just showing you what I'm noticing. For what it's worth, I did defrag the hard disk, I disabled startup programs, and overall it just feels really slow, particularly with the boot up. But it is using an Intel Celeron, and those don't have the greatest reputation for speed, pretty much by design. They're built for lower end systems. And speaking of performance issues, the RCA capture can be a little bit spotty. The quality looks decent and the frame rate is smooth, but when recording is enabled, frame rate drops significantly. When playing back the videos, the E1 may also drop frames, depending on the recording's quality settings. But my biggest beef with the system, in terms of corner cutting, is the cheap sound system. It's driven by a Crystal CS4280 card, but the speakers, they just sound like crap. There's very little dynamic range, and everything just sounds kind of fuzzy and tinny. And it's not just the speakers. I tried listening to music with headphones via the headphone jack and the audio out jack, and there's a lot of hissing in the signal, and both jacks squeal. You can also notice squealing if you put your ears really close to the speakers. It's not as bad as the headphone jack though. However, when the computer is shut down and you're just using the solo CD player feature, the music sounds fine. There's no squealing, there's no hissing. But when you turn the computer back on, that's when the noise comes back. So this issue is likely due to interference. There's a lot of electronic components packed together in a tight space with inadequate shielding. The iMac, on the other hand, sounds perfectly fine. There's definitely some corner cutting going on, but that's what you get when you cheap out most of the time. But for some people, that's totally okay. But what's not okay is copying other people's designs. Where do you draw the line between borrowing someone's work and copying someone's work and just using someone else's work as inspiration? It's a gray area, and that's why we have courts. And Apple absolutely took advantage of this. So what happened with this lawsuit? And why and how did the E1 get banned? It didn't take long for Apple to catch wind of the new blue competitor in the PC world. 2 weeks after E1 launched, Apple filed a lawsuit against eMachines. Steve Jobs, Apple's interim CEO at the time, said there is an unlimited number of original designs that eMachines could have created for their computers, but instead they chose to copy Apple's designs. At the same time, Stephen Ducker, eMachines CEO, said the E1 was not an iMac knockoff, saying they are not alike. Really? You know, something funny happened recently. I was on a FaceTime call with my mom, and I showed her the E1, and instinctively she thought it was an Apple product. Just throwing that out there. But in the eyes of the law, what exactly are these companies fighting over? It's called trade dress. Trade dress is part of trademark law. Trade dress refers to the design of a product, for example, the product shape or configuration. It also refers to the color of the product and the packaging of the product. And the purpose of trade dress protection is to protect consumers from accidentally buying imitative products. And in the iMac case, we can reasonably assume Apple wanted their computer to continue selling successfully, instead of some potential sales accidentally winding up in eMachines' pockets because a consumer was confused about what computer to buy. The case was now in the hands of the legal system. So what ruling does Apple deserve? Sure, the E1 looks similar to the iMac, but there's still plenty of differences. And Apple isn't immune to lawsuits. But fate was on their side. And on March 8th, 2000, Apple won the case and secured a worldwide injunction against eMachines. That's a fancy word meaning Judge Judy said so. By law, eMachines was no longer allowed to sell, distribute, manufacture, or promote the E1. However, Apple was okay with the E1 being redesigned and sold in the future. There's some news articles that hint at eMachines' intentions to release a redesigned E1, but I can't find any photos of this alleged redesign, so I'm not sure it ever went to market. There was kind of a redesign released in 2007, but we'll get to that soon. It's also worth noting that Apple secured an injunction against Teu regarding Future Power's ePower computer, which looked even more like an iMac than the E1 did. Wow. So what happened after the lawsuit? Shortly after the lawsuit wrapped up, eMachines went public with a $180 million IPO. However, because eMachines sold their PCs for very low prices, the profit margins were thin, around 4%. The company was losing money, and eventually they were delisted from the stock exchange. But remember the original founder of eMachines, Lapshun Wei? He bought back the company for a $161 million deal and made it private again. And eMachines survived long enough for Gateway to acquire them in March 2004 for $234 million in cash and stock. And in September 2007, Gateway introduced, drum roll please, the Gateway 1, a new all-in-one computer which, hey, also had the word 1 in the name. Interesting. And in October 2007, Gateway was officially acquired by Acer in a $710 million deal. And the eMachines brand survived until Acer discontinued it in January 2013. But I think eMachines had a good run. They helped expand the PC market, and I applaud them for that. Just don't copy Apple. They have a lot of money and a lot of lawyers. You know, we were talking about company acquisitions earlier, and another company that was recently acquired is Linode. They were bought by Akamai. And if you have an application or website that needs to be scaled and deployed, Linode has the infrastructure and the 24/7 support you need. Linode offers out-of-box apps for game servers like TF2, CSGO, and even Minecraft. You can run your own virtual private network with OpenVPN, build an online application with Joomla's content management system, or build a video streaming site with a multitude of app choices. There's so much you can do with Linode's affordable Linux virtual machines, And to boot, they offer award-winning 24/7 technical support. To put it simply, if it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode. Visit linode.com/computerclan and click one of the sign-up buttons. And we'll give you a 60-day $100 credit just for watching this episode. And when you do that, you're also supporting the Computer Clan, so thank you very much. I think Apple's Bertrand Serlet said it best. If you can't innovate, I guess you just imitate, but it's never quite as good as the original. It's okay to be inspired by others, but don't be afraid to be original. And hey, you might just create the next big product. Catch the crazy and pass it on.
Forget this. Martha, fix me a bowl of applesauce.